is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 364. My name is Marshall. I am one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line from, I think, Denver, maybe still Rotterdam. I don't know. Your brain's probably still in Rotterdam. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. How's it going, Luis?
It's going well. The turkey is dry brining in the fridge.
Whoa.
Yeah, trying something different this time.
That sounds good.
I'm preparing to cook that and mac and cheese tomorrow. That's all I'm on the hook for.
Dear God, that sounds fantastic. I think we're going to do crab. That's what my family normally does.
Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, we are a very Pacific Northwest family. In fact, the family that I'm going to go visit, we were all born and raised here. So yeah, the crab thing is kind of a weird, but it's really good. We're both back from Rotterdam. We were doing coverage at the World Magic Cup. That was a fun one in some ways. and I'm glad to be home, but man, this jet lag is killing me. I've been up till like 5 or 6 in the morning somehow, and I haven't actually figured out how that's working.
It's not even how it's supposed to work when you're coming from Europe.
Normally I crash out at about 9 or 10 and then wake up too early, but somehow it's back. Anyway, I don't know, but we're here, we're doing the show, and we're feeling wildly energetic and focused as we embark on episode 364. Before we get into all the details of that episode, I want to remind you about our sponsor. That's right, channelfireball.com. They are the place to go to get everything you need magic related. That's if you want to go online and buy singles or supplies or sealed product or anything related. Channel Fireball is the place to go for sure. They're going to have everything that you need. They ship quickly. They have good customer service. They stand by their product. And while you're there, you can check out some of the awesome free content. That's right. All free. You show up and you can watch videos. You can read articles. You can get sideboard guides. You can watch people draft from some of the best players in the world, all for free right on the front page of Channel Fireball. And while you're there, you can also sell your cards back. That's right. If you are in that loop where you're kind of selling cards and buying cards, they buy them. And if you want to trade them in, you'll even get a 30% bonus for trading them in for store credit. So please do check them out, channelfireball.com. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's right. You can go to patreon.com/limitedresources and sign up there. It's really cool. It's a really neat thing that exists these days and never used to. But now people like us can make free content, which I think is great. I much prefer making free content. I like being as many people as possible being able to get their hands on this stuff, but it's hard to keep doing it over and over again. It requires resources and it's difficult. And one of the cool things out there is this crowdsourcing. Patreon, I think, is the best one for podcasts and things like the one we do. Basically, you choose how much you want to give per show. It can be any amount. You can cap your monthly amount too, so that you stay within any budget that you have. And you get some cool perks. And, one of the things that you get is you get to submit questions for the question of the week, which we're going to do here in just a minute. You also get added to the list of names for giveaways. Any patron, anybody that's a patron on our page is eligible for giveaways. And Luis, after we do the question of the week, we're doing the big giveaway here, buddy. I've got a torrential gear Hulk in my hand. I've got a Chrome Mox. What are these things called? Masterpiece.
Where did you get that? I've
got a Tornado from Alliances. I've got two Wildest Dreams and a bunch of other rares in my hand. And I'm going to be giving these away along with the Limited Resources deck box to one lucky supporter. If you want to get in on this, we give away all the rares that we get on the show. And I'm going to give these ones away for now, but when we do our Crack-A-Pack, hey, that rare's going in the new pile, and I often throw in extra stuff too. I threw in a water bottle, a backpack, some other cool stuff, and I'll continue to do that. I really enjoy that part of it, and it's a good way to thank you, our dear patrons, for supporting us, as we really do appreciate it. So let's do the question of the week first, and this is just another perk of being a patron. If you are, you can submit questions for the question of the week, and we pick one per week. This one comes from Eric Penner, who says, "Hey, Marshall and Luis, I've been listening since Tarkir and have been drafting since Scars. The question I have a hard time with is, when is a removal spell bad? Where is the threshold of removal to make it not worth the slot in your deck? I often over-prioritize things like tidy conclusion or impeccable timing." When is it bad, Luis? It's not very often.
So what Eric is describing here is that he's starting from a baseline of like removal is good, because that's kind of where you should start.
Mm-hmm.
you know how vanilla creatures they have a burden to meet before you put them in your deck, which is like, do you pass the vanilla test? Removal is kind of the opposite, where you have to find reasons that they're bad more than reasons that they're good, because removal is among the most sought after type of card in Limited.
Mm-hmm.
So in one way, the answer is just contextual. It's like, well, the good ones are good and the bad ones are bad, but that's not very useful. So drilling down a little further, things you should look for when trying to figure out if removal is bad is it inefficient? So when you look at something like Throttle or similar 5 or 6 mana removal spells, Certain Death, an Eldritch Moon, like these cards are fine, but they're not great, and you don't want multiples of them, because 5 or 6 mana spells that often you're going to cast to kill 4 mana creatures, that's just not a good exchange, and you just can't put 5-6 drops in your deck.
Mm-hmm.
The other is situational, things like Impeccable Timing. That needs certain situations to come up before it becomes good, and it turns out that the situation of them getting to block first before you deal the damage means that for aggressive white decks, Impeccable Timing is just not that good. So
even defensive decks, it's not great, right? Because there's a lot of good combat tricks that kind of
and large creatures. They have they're wayward giants and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to start with the baseline of removal spells are good, and then from there, the reasons that you don't want them in your deck are they're too inefficient or they're too situational. Those are the two real main reasons. Efficient and unconditional removal is the stuff that you snap up and you will never have too many of.
Yeah, there's only really weird corner cases where, you've neglected to draft enough creatures and you have so much premium removal that you just have to start taking creatures over. That comes up once in every 100 drafts or something like that.
Right.
So it's not a
when
realistic
you have
case.
Lightning Strike, 1 in a red, deal 3 damage instant.
Yeah.
That's just always the best common when it's in a set.
Yeah.
That is just better than pretty much any of the creatures. Like, that's efficient and powerful, and you're not going to have too many of them, and you're always going to want them. On the other hand, your Throttles are that's a card you can easily pass on.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Eric, thanks for the question. And that, of course, brings us to our giveaway. So let's give this Chromox away, Luis. You didn't really want that anyway, right?
I did want it some, but more I wanted to complain about never opening it, and then when I opened it, it was too late.
It was too late, and now you've actually opened 2 masterpieces and effectively given both of them away. So, wow, that's not what I expected out of you, but here we go. Okay, we've got our giveaway. It's all ready. Our winner is Jesse Coombs. Jesse from Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much for your support, Jesse. We really appreciate it. And I'll be sending this tornado your way. Not many tornadoes down in California, but there's one heading your way, Jesse. Thanks again. And again, as we move into our Crack-A-Pack, which is what we're going to do right now, the rares out of these packs are going to go into the new little bundle of rares that we're going to save up and give away. And like I said, I like to give away other stuff too. And so look out for that. This one comes from Eric from GP Dallas. Thank you, Eric, this booster pack. I've done plenty of these at this point, so I'm going to kind of cruise through them. Nimble Innovator. It's not that great. I've played it a few times, but it's not that great.
When I first started with Kaladesh, I thought this would be a card I would be happy with, and I had like 2 in my first deck. The card's just not good.
It's just not that good.
It's just too inefficient is the problem. Like, even for a set that is like based around, like, a lot of the decks are just, spend time kind of spinning wheels. This doesn't really work with any of the combo cards either. I don't know. I have not been impressed with the card.
Yeah, I mean, you think it would, right? Like, I can acrobatic maneuver this, or I can pick it up with my aviary mechanic.
Right.
And those are all true. It's just so damn slow, right? And it doesn't have enough board effect against the aggressive decks to really make you happy either.
Yeah, it's not powerful enough against the nonsense decks, and it's definitely not good enough against the aggressive decks.
Right, it's just stuck in the middle. Spontaneous Artist, that's the 4 mana 3/3 that can get haste by spending an energy. You can give other things haste too.
Perfectly passable
aggressive
card. Yeah.
Ambitious Etherborn. Fine 5-drop, 5 mana 4/3 with Fabricate 1 in black.
Again, a fine playable. I think I would.
I just don't even look at cards like this first pick.
Yeah, you just. I cannot imagine a sequence of cards in a pack where I'd first pick a Spontaneous Artist or Ambitious Etherborn, though I will play both those cards.
Yeah, agreed. Exactly. This next one is one that does catch my eye, though. I have to admit, I'm not really super stoked to first pick it. It's Attune with Ether.
It's a fine card. It's kind of what makes 3-color decks or 4-color decks a little more doable, and it provides a little bit of energy. So right now I'm taking Attune.
Yeah, I am too. Impeccable Timing does not knock Attune off the list for me. Neither does Fireforger's Puzzle Knot or Curio Vendor. All right, here's one to talk about. Chandra's Pyrohelix. You know, you and I both thought it was going to be a bit better than it's turned out to be, I think.
Yeah, it's more medium. You'll always play it if you're red, and you'll take it reasonably high, but it's just not a card. It's not a card I feel like I seek out and specifically want in my deck. It's one I'll just play.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is skewed by the fact that you and I do view this, I think, primarily as an inevitability format rather than a aggression-based format, though both type of decks are definitely fully supported. But when I'm building my deck, I'm building it towards inevitability rather than the Chandra's Pyrohelix, which has a marginal effect when aimed at players and is a decent, cheap removal spell, but it really doesn't do much in the late game, right? Once you get the engine rolling, it doesn't really take care of any of the things that you want, and it kind of acts like a dead card. And so it really, to me, is really only good in an aggressive deck, primarily. You can play it if you're playing some type of control red deck. That doesn't happen very much, though. Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, no. All right, well, our last common's a nice one. It's Renegade Freighter.
I will reluctantly take Renegade Freighter from this pack. It is a powerful card.
It really is. It still just sucks to be on the wrong side of,
Yeah.
But it's so boring. Like,
look,
dude, I'm Renegade Freighter.
We might be very deep in Kaladesh to the point where we're just trying to figure out how to best use decoction modules. But for people, if you want to win your draft so far with the information you have, you should take Renegade Freighter.
Yeah. So what we need to do is I need you to snap me out of it here, Luis. I'm on draft 150 or whatever. So what I need you to do is say, Marsh, it's day 2 of a GP, right? Like you're in your second draft at a GP day, and if you 3-0 this draft, you stand a chance to top 8, right? Now all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm back, right? And I'm taking Renegade Freighter. Yeah, no problem, right? So you need to help me, Luis. All right, make obsolete, no. All right, here's some business. Aerial Responder.
All right, I'm in for Aerial Responder. 2/3 flying, a lifelink vigilance for 3.
It is a powerful card. It is.
It is, and it's good in an aggressive or defensive deck. It's just a good card. I would, even though it's double white, I'd still rather take it over Renegade Freighter.
Ooh, things are getting interesting now. Here's Snarethopter. 4 mana, 3/2 flying haste. So this is colorless, but pretty powerful.
Even at colorless, I think it's worse than Renegade Freighter, or not Renegade Freighter, Aerial Responder.
I do too.
Do think it's probably worse than Renegade Freighter also. So I would still rather just take Responder here.
Okay. I think do I like Snarethopter better than Renegade Freighter? I don't think I've
I think
weighed
the
these cards
better.
out. I mean, one of them's just a creature. Like doesn't need any help.
But a 3-drop is a lot better than a 4-drop, and the Freighter does hit really hard. I mean, Snarethopter is pretty good too.
Yeah, that's interesting comparison. All right, our rare is Ovia Pashiri Sage Lifecrafter. That's the green 1/2 legend, and she's legendary. She's a human artificer, and you can pay 2 and a green and tap her to make a 1/1 servo, or 4 and a green and tap her to make an XS colorless construct creature token, where X is the number of creatures you control, in parentheses, at the time you activated this ability or whatever. It doesn't count itself, is all I'm saying.
It does not.
It counts her. It just doesn't.
The green
count
pack
itself.
rat. Ovia is just, I think, the best card in the pack.
I do too. This card's great.
She's very, very good.
Yeah, and again, this does sort of go to our mentality, right? I'm looking for engines. I'm looking for 2-card combos, 1-card combos, things, 3-card, things that in the late part of the game can allow me to maximize my mana and take over a mid to late game battle against a similar deck. And Ovia Pashiri does that on her own. Really great. I mean, the card just sits there and just says, you got extra mana, I got a place to put it. And once you get up to 5, she's a major issue for your opponent, because even if it's just tap 5, make like a 3/3, they're not getting smaller, right? Like they just keep getting bigger. And if you're at any type of parity, she's going to absolutely dominate the board. If you're ahead, no problem. Like she's a little slow, but whatever, you're happy to have this option. And, yes, if you're behind, significantly, she's a little clunky to make that work, but I'm not going to hold that against her. I'd take Ovia Pashiri as well.
And she only costs 1 mana. So
1 mana. 1 mana.
You're investing very little into her.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'm sorry, Via, but you're going in the sleeve here because she's going to get sent off at some point. But yes, that is the card I'd like to take here as well. Okay, Louise, with that out of the way, rubbing my hands together because this is going to be a good one.
Oh yeah,
we're
I'm
leveling
actually
up
looking
today.
forward to this topic.
Yeah, I have too. And we're leveling up today, buddy. There is no joke. Our main topic today is we're going to talk about our approach. Luis and I share a very similar approach to gaming and to life. We're going to be talking about the methods and the ways and even some of the specific tools and tricks and traps and things like that we use when we play Magic and really any game. For me, I learned a lot of these lessons through poker and also in life, right? When you have to deal with tough life decisions or you have to make choices throughout the course of your life, this is the framework under which we make those decisions. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, right? Because it's hard to imagine a framework comprehensive enough to cover all the different things. And the truth is, this doesn't cover everything. There's a lot of things in life that you're going to need to make decisions that don't use this. And I think that, it is a skill to know when something like our system here applies or when it doesn't. But this is the fundamental basis that we use for Magic, and it does apply in life often, maybe way more often than you'd even originally see. So let's get into this, Luis. Why should we use these tools and these methods, and why should you? That's the question I think that we should answer this episode for our listeners, right? Why do we use them, and why should our listeners use them? And of course, part of that is going to be explaining what those actually mean. So where do you want to start here?
So I just want to preface this by saying that some of the things we're going to talk about today are what I consider the most valuable lessons I've learned from Magic, both in the sense that I learned these tools in order to better understand Magic and then applied them to life decisions in general, and because I learned them directly from Magic. They went both directions. In some cases, it's like, let's learn about expected value so I can be better at Magic. And some, it's like through playing Magic, I deciphered some of these things and then worked backwards from there and been like, wow, these are really useful. So I think that trying to take a rational and logical view of how you're making decisions and why you're making decisions and is really useful. Like you said, these don't cover everything you do. Inside of Magic, there's no emotion. And we're going to talk about a lot of tools that are actually specifically designed to take the emotional aspect out of it. And that's what's useful when you're playing Magic or playing poker, because emotion does not have a place in just this purely rational decision making. In life, that's clearly not true. So we're not saying go through life as robots calculating, the EV of being nice to your coworker.
Yeah.
That's definitely not what we're saying.
No, and if you've ever been in love, you'll know that many of these things do not apply.
Right. But there are a lot of decisions in life that you really shouldn't use your emotions on, like deciding, what path to get to work, deciding what to spend your money on, deciding, what decision to make that, when it's just purely like a business transaction. These do give you a good framework for making those decisions. And there are ways that, I think that this has improved my life dramatically and maybe better at Magic, in whatever order you think is most important. So we're going to go through a lot of the different techniques and tools we use and talk about different examples in Magic and outside of Magic where they've been useful. So
yeah, brace yourself. We're going to go deep this time too. We really are going to try to. This is not for the faint of heart. If this is your first episode of Limited Resources, welcome. put on your diving suit because we're going real deep on this one.
All right, so let's start with expected value, since we talk about EV so much. And another reason we want to do this episode, by the way, is we take a lot of this for granted, Marshall, you and I, because
absolutely.
It's so ingrained in how we think about things. And we want to make sure the listeners are on the same page, because when we talk about the expected value of something, it's just we know what that means intrinsically because we use it all the time. So expected value is a pretty simple concept once you work through it. The definition is a predicted value of a variable calculated as the sum of all possible values, each multiplied by the probability of its occurrence. So that sounds complicated, but it really isn't. Imagine a coin flip where if you win the flip, you make $100, and if you lose the flip, you make $0. The EV is $50 because you're going to win half your coin flips.
Right. That's what you can expect to win on average
and
over the course of time.
And yes, and critical, there's no outcome that has you winning exactly $50.
Right.
EV is not trying to say what you will end up with in your hand, because here you're going to end up with 0 or 100, but the expected value is 50, because that's how much. Especially if you one easy way to think about it is if you did a bunch in a row, you would end up with 50 per is what you could expect. So if you did 10, you could end up with about 500.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's the real key, though. We've uncovered one of the earliest, I think, tripping points for a lot of people is that I think that there's a disconnect there, right? Where they say, well, you say that I make, air quotes, make $50 per coin flip in this scenario, right? Where like if I win, I get 100. If I lose, I get 0. On average, I'm getting $50 per flip, but I never actually get $50 in a flip ever, right? Because that's just not one of the possible outcomes. So people, I think, already stumble right there and say, well, how does this doesn't make any sense. And I'm not making $50 per coin flip. So what are you talking about? Right. And this is where we have to use our brain to let a concept come in that's a little bit abstract. Right. It's a strange concept to try to grasp, because the thing that you come to the conclusion on isn't actually even possible. Right. Which is just a very weird way to look at it, for your brain, because, what you want to do is you want to know, well, if I flip this coin, am I going to win money or not? Or how much am I going to win? Or, more importantly, like this is a very nice coin. There's a lot of coins that take money from you, right? And, you want to know, well, how much could I lose? And, the way that you figure this out is by figuring out what you stand to win or lose on average over a long enough sample size, right? That's the key, is what do I do on average? And then your goal is to do the thing that gives you the most benefit and just let the results happen, right? But your decision-making process stopped when you decided, yes, I'm going to flip this coin, or no, I'm not going to flip this coin. The result of that isn't relevant to your decision process, because you did the math, you have the logic, you know what you stand to gain from it. Whether you did gain from it or not isn't relevant to the decision. And there's a big dividing line there, right? People are taught from the time that they're tiny that you do a thing and you see a result, right? When you're a little tiny baby, they'll be like, pick up the cup. And you're like, you pick up the cup, and they go, you picked up the cup. And it's like, yay, right? And then like you get into school and they say, if you study hard, you'll get a good grade. And so you study hard and then you get the good grade and you're like, okay, I'm starting to correlate these things. If I do this, then I get this. And that's just how your brain sort of works, right? But when it comes to more complex and especially random things, which pop up in real life a lot, but are ubiquitous in both Magic and poker, and most good games have a random element of some sort to them. These things pop up constantly, and it's not as clean cut as if you do this, you get this. It's if you do this over the long term, you will end up getting this. And that requires some faith, right? That requires you to have confidence in your decision process and understand that even though, you feel confident about what you did, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get what you want this exact time.
Yeah. And what's critical is that you made the best decision before you know the results. And I'm not saying ignore the results, but you can't let that detract from a good decision-making process. So an example of using EV that I think a lot of people, because of a different fallacy of risk aversion, is I offer you this 100-0 coin flip, or you could just get $40. And
so you walk up to me on the street and you say, I'm going to flip a coin. And if it's heads, you get $100. And if it's if it's a tails, you get 0. Or my other option is you just hand me $40 and I walk away.
Right.
And a lot of people will just take the $40. Is that what you're saying?
And a lot of people take the $40 because they don't want to lose and get nothing. And in a strictly mathematical terms, in order to end up with the most money, you should just take the coin flip. And in a game of Magic, that's also similar, where if you can calculate the EV of two different plays, you should go with the highest one, even if it maybe has a higher risk. But you want the higher EV in general.
Yeah, because so you're saying on the coin flip, my expected value, what I should gain from it, as we discussed earlier, is $50.
Is higher than the guaranteed 40.
Right, which is more than 40. So from a pure gamer standpoint, it's an easy decision, right? Now,
Yes.
The fact is I might walk away with $0 and I could have had 40 and that feels bad. Like psychologically, right? You're going to kick yourself and go, I should have just taken the $40. Right. But this is the thing that we're trying to smash, right? This is the idea and the concept and the speed bump in your brain that we're trying to clear away for you. Because if you look down the line, if every time somebody comes up and says, hey, I'll offer you this, $50 coin flip or the $40 guaranteed. If you just walked away every single time and took the 50, by the end of 10 years, you're going to be rich. Like you're going to be significantly more rich than if you just taken the 40 every single time. Yeah. And that's a hard thing for people to get,
And of course, I have to go back to the caveat that in real life, there are people who should take the $40 because life, what if that's the $40 you need to buy a bus ticket home?
Right.
Right. So we're when we use money as an example, it's because money is just very concrete, mm-hmm. and we're just operating under the assumption. And remember, this is an assumption. I know this doesn't hold for always. That you just want to maximize how much money you're going to have over the course of all these decisions. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, and the assumption, of course, for Magic, Luis, is you want to win as much as you can.
Yeah, you want to win as many matches, and me right now, if I was offered this, would always just take the coin flip. If you increase those numbers to a coin flip of $1 million versus $0 versus someone handing me $400,000, I would just take the $400,000 because mm-hmm. the marginal benefit of $400,000 versus $1 million is not as big of an advantage as the difference between 0 and 400,000.
Right, but the cool part is that you're still applying logic to this equation.
Right.
Right. That's the question. Is that like if I told you, and this is going to be different for everybody, but I could adjust these numbers and have you give me different answers.
Yes.
Right. I could lower the 400,000 guarantee amount to something that the difference was just too big. If I said I can give you $50,000 today, which probably won't change your life, for the long term meaningfully. It'd be wouldn't be a bad day for you, but that's not going to be the type of thing where you're like, well, we're moving, to Beverly Hills or whatever, right? But if I decrease that and we did the coin flip and you can win 500,000, you'd probably take the flip at that point, right? And there's these things that are constantly moving around, and these variables are similar in gaming as well, where they're constantly different, and you have to constantly apply the same logic structure to it over and over and over again.
Yeah. So EV is just like an underlying theory that is just incredibly useful. What it's trying to do is separate the results from the initial evaluation. And what we try to help you build throughout just the course of the podcast is having a good way to get a strong initial evaluation and then work from there. And honestly, it's this is a term I learned many, many years ago, and it's been incredibly useful, so ingrained that I just don't even think about it anymore. You just figure it out, and it's really good to know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so I've actually got a way, because I think that some questions spring to mind here, Luis.
Okay.
Okay, so you're telling me that I need to figure out what the EV is in different situations. How do I conceptualize that, right? Like, how do I even picture that in my head? Because it's hard to, sometimes it's easy to figure out, right? Like if we do the coin flip, yeah, like I can do the math on that, in my head or with a calculator, depending on, how we change these things around, and I can just tell you. But, when it comes to these really complicated things like we often find in Magic, I find that going back actually to the early days of our podcast, in a concept that Ryan came up with, he called the time traveling supercomputer, is one that's really useful for me. And the reason is this is what it is. It's a way to help you realize that you're thinking and should be thinking in the extreme long term. Right? Not in the what happens if I lose this coin flip, but in my life, whenever I'm presented with these type of scenarios, I'm going to take the one that gives me the best long-term advantage, because I realize that over the course of my life, if I apply this over and over and over and over, and I'm also talking about within a game of Magic, that I will come out ahead. And all of the successful players that you see, the John Finkels, the William Huey Jensens, the Owen Turtenwalds, the Louis Scott-Vargases of Magic, all use this mentality. All of them. use this and understand it innately and they don't even have to think about it. And I'll tell you what, it's the same thing for successful poker players too. Because they realize that in any one transaction, anything can happen and things get kind of crazy. But when you're presented with options every turn of every game of Magic that you play, and if you consistently take the route that gives you the highest return, it'll do it. But again, it's hard because you're only presented these things one at a time. You don't get to make the decision over the long term in one fell swoop. You have to dedicate yourself to it and continue to do it. And this is where the time traveling supercomputer comes in, because what you can do is you can ask yourself, what would it do? Okay, so I'm going to start by saying what it is. The time traveling supercomputer is, imagine a computer so powerful it can travel through time and log every possible outcome of any situation. So for example, let's say you're making a close choice between two draft picks. Which is the right pick? How will you know if you pick correctly? Because a lot of times you won't, right? I mean, how do you actually know? If you had a time traveling supercomputer, you could simply plug in every possible outcome for the entire draft. I'm talking about what every other person took, every other choice that you took after this, every play that was possible through every game iteration possible within the pool of cards and the players that we've drafted, and it would spit out a number. And you would have these two cards that you're deciding between, and one of them would have a number on it and the other one would have a number on it. And that number would tell you what your win percentage is if you take card A and what your win percentage is if you take card B. Now, that's what you're aiming for. That's what you're trying to grasp and trying to apply yourself. Now, you can't, right? We can't. I can't do that. You can't do that. Luis can't do that. He's in the Hall of Fame. People can't run those type of numbers in their head. And we do not currently have computer technology nor time travel technology equipped to give us actual black and white numbers on a piece of paper or on your screen. So what we're trying to do is emulate that. But the key is that you get it into your head that you're trying to figure out what that computer would say, not what your gut says or what your heart says or any of these other things. That your ultimate goal is to try to mimic and try to emulate what that computer would tell you whenever you can. And that's a much different question than most people face when they look at a difficult choice in a game of Magic or in a draft of Magic about what do I feel like I should do? Or, whatever. The question you should ask yourself is, what would the time traveling supercomputer tell me here? Right. And then you start to get a framework for it, because you won't know the exact answer, but at least you know the question that you're asking, which is, over the nearly infinite long term, which one of these decisions would give me the right, the most win percentage? Because again, we're nuts and bolts spikes. That's what we're going for on this podcast. That's what, Luis and I play Magic for. Sure, we like to have fun with it. And if you watch our streams, you'll know that, we have other sides to us as well. But, for the purposes of this show, this is all about winning. And if that's the case, then, you want to try to get as close as you can to that time traveling supercomputer figure. Another example that's similar is, should you attack or block in a game? You can run all the scenarios for your opponent, drawn cards, the way a player could attack or block, all that stuff, and it'll spit that thing out. Now, the cool part is that since we can't actually get this number, we can use a lot of things to help us get to it. We can use our skill set, our intuition, our tools, our knowledge, anything that we're trying to do that we have available to us to try to predict what the time traveling supercomputer would say to the best of our ability. It's that simple. It's us trying to get as close as we can to what we think it would say. We're trying to make the player decision that will let us win the most games and matches of Magic over the extreme long term. And that's really the thing that you have to take away from this example and from this, supercomputer thing is that you're trying to emulate that. And that's a mental shift, I think, for a lot of players who just look at each scenario as its own novel thing and don't really have a framework for how do I know if the play's better? If the play's better if it gives you the highest win percentage over the long term. And that pops up in examples like you used, Luis, when you said sometimes a high risk example looks very scary. But right. Scary doesn't apply to the time traveling supercomputer. Yes,
scary is just not a word that really should enter your mind when you're thinking about plays.
Exactly.
I mean, it's natural that it does. Look, we're not trying to say.
Yeah, I'm not a time traveling supercomputer
when you play Magic, but we're trying to say when you're making decisions, it really does not help to be like, whoa, if this one goes wrong, I lose the game. But it's like, yeah, that might be true, but we're not interested in whether you lose the game. We're interested in what gives you the highest win percentage chance. And if the play gives you, a 26% chance of winning the game, even if you lose on the spot, if the play doesn't work, but your percent chance of playing the game, your other play gives you a 18% chance of winning the game, then it's like, well, you should make the play that gives you a higher percent chance of winning the game.
Right. One of the examples, by the way, of how to compare yourself to the time traveling supercomputer, and it's a fairly obvious one or whatever, is like, it's pack one, pick one. You open a 4-mana card that's an A. Okay, it's considered one of the best cards in the set, and the rest of the pack is relatively weak. You take it because you intuitively know that it will increase your win percentage the most. Now, the key here is usually this is simply expressed as, well, it's the best card in the pack, right? For people like us, like Nuts and Bolts Spikes will just be like, it's the best card, so I took it. And you just know that that's the best card and you should take it. But what that really translates to is it will increase my win percent more than any other card in this pack over the long term. So the time traveling supercomputer would spit out a number that said this increases your chance of winning the draft by 7% or whatever, right? But for you and I, what we're really saying when we say this is the best card, when we take Ovia Pashiri pack one, pick one, is that we feel like this is going to give us the highest return as far as win percentage goes out of all the cards in the pack, which is, again, a subtle distinction, but something worth noting.
So an example of actually that came up on Twitter recently of how some of these players you mentioned use this is actually Owen Turnwald posted a hand with Infect and Modern that had no lands in it. Mm-hmm. It was a 6-card hand, no lands, with a Gitaxian Probe on the draw. Mm-hmm. And he's like, would you keep or would you mulligan? 53% of the people said keep, and like 47% said mulligan. And Owen said it's just a very clear keep because you have a high enough percentage of hitting a land because you get to scry and then draw a card for your turn because you're on the draw, and then probe. So you get 3 shots at hitting a land. And the contents of the hand were good enough that one land would make that hand very good. Mm-hmm. Note he didn't include what happened in the game.
Right.
Like that's not relevant.
That's so key. Yeah, that's so important.
And he was just and this is actually one of the more clear-cut examples. I don't remember the actual numbers because it doesn't matter for this particular example, but he knows how many lands are in his deck. He can figure out approximately what his odds are of drawing a land and look at that and think like, okay, that's high enough compared to my win percentage on a mulligan to 5. Because the overall win percentage of hands that mulligan to 5 are something like 22%. So if you're like 50% to draw a land or more, and then from there on get to play a game where you're like 50% to win or more because the hand was actually good with one land, maybe you're 60% to win that game. That is higher than 22%, and those are the kind of numbers. And look, Owen is not in the game going to just do all that math exactly because some of that stuff is just you don't have the right information, you don't have the time to necessarily run all those numbers. But it's more that he can look at that hand, know that the odds are of drawing a land are high enough that it's worth keeping, and then go from there. And even if he doesn't draw a land and he loses the game, that doesn't mean the decision was wrong.
Right. And I think that you bring up a really important point here, right? We're trying to emulate this idea of this long-term gain in our heads as human beings. And there's some really cool stuff that our brains can do if you practice. And what Owen's doing is like you said, at the table, he's not going to be able to run those numbers and have all that information available to him. But you know what? He can away from the table. And the more you do that, the more you can start to see the patterns of the type of hands and the type of things that do work out for you long term, especially the unintuitive ones. I have an unintuitive example, going back to what we were just talking about, that's draft related. So like let's say it's pack 3, pick 1, and you have 4 amazing 5-drops and 2 amazing 6-drops, but no 2-drops in your deck at all yet. And you open up your pack and it's got an amazing 6-drop, but also a playable 2-drop. It's very likely that the 2-drop will increase your overall draft win percentage more than the amazing 6-drop because you've already got such a wealth of cards at the 5 and 6 mana slot that, curve considerations are now more important than raw power level. It's counterintuitive because the 6-drop is amazing and usually a card you'd never pass. But this is a situation where the time traveling supercomputer might surprise you and show you that taking the 2-drop will increase your win percentage more than taking the bomb. as players, it's our job to get as close to guessing at what the time traveling supercomputer will say as possible, given that we don't likely and won't likely have access to one of those anytime soon. So, this is fundamental.
Well, I just want to say that a lot of what we're going to talk about today sounds esoteric and sounds a bit complicated, but once you understand the concepts beneath these examples, it becomes easier and easier to apply them to the point where, again, you internalize them and you don't think about them that much. And you don't need to because you understand what you have this framework. So that's what we're trying to do. We're going to keep using examples and keep trying to convince you that thinking about things this way is what you want to do. And then that'll help you. I mean, it's just like anything. You haven't really achieved mastery of something until you basically do it without thinking. That's like the actual true mastery of it.
Yeah, exactly. And, and some of the examples we've come up with here are to show you that you're probably doing a good amount of this already. It's just you may be doing it in different terms, right? Like I said before, if you take a card because it's the best card in the pack, right? You may be using language like, well, it's the best card, so I took it. But what you should, or what you're really saying is it's the card that gives me the highest win percent, out of all the cards in the pack. And so, once you realize that, you're like, actually, I'm doing this all the time. There are, though, a lot of traps. There's also a lot of counterintuitive examples. I think the best counterintuitive spot is one that you just mentioned a few minutes ago, Luis, which is the idea of, but I might lose, a risky position in a game. But that's not relevant to the high level player. They're only concerned with which line of play gives them the highest possible chance of winning the game, even if that chance isn't particularly high. And that's one that you'll see people struggle with a lot because they don't fundamentally view the game in the same way. They're trying to not lose the game, for example. Or they're trying to win through some method that is relatively risk-free because it makes them feel like they're more in control of the game. And you'll see professional players take what look like reckless risks in the middle of a game, but it's because they've recognized that the only way that they have to realistically win the game is to take a risk like that. And if it doesn't pay off, they can accept that because in their mind, they were going to lose anyway. So the risk that they took was the only way that gave him a shot of winning. And I've seen you do this. I mean, I've seen professional players do this all the time. Another one that I want you to talk about, Luis, here is the idea of playing around a card and when it's appropriate to do so or not. You'll often hear pros say, well, if you can't beat it anyway, don't play around it. That's very uncomfortable, right? For your average player. They look at it and they say, but I don't want to get blown out by a removal spell, but that's not the way that you guys approach it.
Yeah. One of the best examples, the classic one is you're playing against a sweeper, Wrath of God is the classic sweeper, Day of Judgment, whatever. So you're playing against opponent, they have this card. The way to play it safe, to play around it, to mitigate the risk of your opponent having this bomb, to make their fumigate less good, is to not overextend. You play your two creatures, and then if they 2-for-1 you, that's not the end of the world, but it forces them to play something, whether it's the sweeper or something else. And then if they play another creature, maybe you play another creature. Either way, you never go completely all in and then lose to the sweeper. Mm-hmm. The problem is some games you just will identify that you will lose to that sweeper. And if that's the case, then slow playing, not overextending, just gives them more turns to draw it, and then you'll still lose to it. And in that case, you should just play all your creatures immediately, because if they don't draw it, you probably just win.
Right. And that's so tough for some people, though, right? Because the reasoning behind it is you've determined that your chance of beating the card if they have it in hand is roughly 0, right? But your chance of beating it if they don't is higher than that. And it goes higher the more creatures you put on the battlefield, right? So you're like, well, if I'm dead to it anyway, I'm going to maximize my chance in the situations where they don't have it. It just doesn't feel good when they do, right? When they're like Wrath of God and you're like, okay, there goes my whole entire team. And, you think to yourself like, oh, that feels terrible. I just had every creature in my hand. I spewed them on the table and they killed them all. But a professional player is willing to accept that risk, knowing that the decision they made beforehand gave them the highest chance to win the game in the aggregate. And that's the difference.
Another example is playing around a combat trick in a situation where you're going to lose to a combat trick if they have it. Mm-hmm. So I've actually just like literally seen people, well, I don't want to double block their 4/4 with my 2/2 and my 3/3 because if they have a combat trick, then I'm going to lose. It's like, if they have a combat trick, they're going to play it on their flyer that you can't block and you're just going to die to it.
Right.
So just make the double block and just assume they don't have it. And that's the sort of thinking that you need to get used to, which is know when you can beat certain things and be consistent when playing around them. That kind of leads into the next thing I want to talk about, which is actually has a bunch more examples in this vein, which is when to increase or decrease variance. Mm-hmm. So when most Magic players who are acquainted with the concept of variance, luck is another way of saying variance, whatever, they think of it as a negative. People don't like, I don't like this format because it's like really high variance, or, that card is really high variance. The thing is, variance can actually just be one of your allies. So you went back to saying making reckless plays when it looks like you're losing, and that's just absolutely true. Like, when you are losing a game, if let's say you're like 90% to lose a game, you don't have many win shares in this game. You only have 10% of this game right now. So playing cards and making actions that increase variance are in your benefit because you're already losing. So to give you an example, imagine there's a card that says roll a 6-sided die, you win on 1 and a 2, and you lose on 3 to 6. Like, at its face, this doesn't seem like a very good card, right? Your 33% chance to win the game and a 66% chance to lose the game, or repeating. Mm-hmm. Well, imagine if you're 10% to win the game. That card starts looking pretty good. It brings your win percentage from 10% to 33%. And imagine that the way you play is kind of a simulation of this card. The smaller the chance you have to win, the more likely you are to make these plays that can pan out and be great, but have a bigger downside. So more concretely, like making an aggressive bluff, attacking a 3/3 into a 4/4. Like, if your opponent blocks and you just bin your creature, first of all, you feel dumb, which should not be relevant here, but it's just going to be true.
Right.
Second of all, that is high variance. Like, you don't know how to predict your opponent's behavior, and if they just block there, it's just so bad for you. But if you're going to lose that game anyway, if you're very far behind, maybe that extra 3 damage actually gives you a significant % chance of winning the game. Now you can top deck, Lava Axe and deal 5 to them. Another example is making a play where you attack with everything, put your opponent, down to 5, so they're dead next turn. But if next turn they have anything, you lose. Like, if they have another creature, you lose. If they have a pump spell or removal spell, you lose. So you're like, you have 3 cards in hand. I have to hope all 3 are lands, and I hope a land is on top of your deck. Yeah, that's not very likely, but let's say you're dead in 2 turns to their unblockable 2/2, and you know that you're not going to beat that any other way. Like, then it's just very clearly the right play to do that.
Right, even though it's uncomfortable, or even though a player who isn't as experienced might not, feel comfortable making that.
And that's the thing is, you want to get over these uncomfortable feelings, these again, looking stupid, not a very relevant metric when it comes to decision making. One of the best examples I've seen of a player who wanted to avoid looking stupid and lost the game as a result was a player who activated a Mutavault. This is at a Grand Prix. So they paid 1 mana, made their Mutavault into a 2/2. Mm-hmm. Realized it was not good to attack with the Mutavault. I could see it in his eyes. And then he was like, shrugged and attacked anyway. And later I talked to him and it's like, why did you attack the Mutavault? I could tell you knew it was not a good idea. He's like, well, I'd already activated it. It would look really dumb if I just activated it and passed the turn. And it's like, wow, that second mistake is way worse than the first mistake.
Yeah, way worse. Oh man, that's insane. You just made
a mistake. The second one, you chose to make a mistake to not look dumb. That is the worst. That is like that. The absolute opposite of what we're saying here. Look dumb all you want. Your goal is to win the game.
Right. Yeah, that's funny.
What we're trying to say here is that those are not reasons to make decisions. The other is that making plays that look reckless or plays that are risky become better and better the worse off you are in the game. The flip side is true too. When you're winning, especially if you can identify that you're winning by a lot, then you have to try to figure out, how can I possibly lose this game? Let's take the most conservative line possible because I have 95% chance to win this game. Like, why should I take any risk? And that's where you do things like Doomblade a 1/1 so that you don't fall to 6 or to fall to 5 from 6 and then give them the out of drawing Lava Axe.
Right.
And it's funny because you mentioned that, like, people watch pros play and are like confused by some of these things. And I think these are the examples that are the most likely look odd, because it's like, wow, why are they playing so recklessly, or why are they playing so conservatively? It's like, because they have identified how ahead or behind they are in a game, and they're adjusting their play as a result. And again, when I'm using these numbers, you never know I'm 90% to win, I'm 95% to win. No. I'm using these to kind of like set how you're feeling at the time. But you can evaluate games where you're very far ahead, right? You can evaluate games where you're very, very far behind.
Yeah, you might not get a number, right? Yeah. But and you've played enough, and you can also ask experienced players, and they'll be able to tell you, oh no, you're significant, and the kind of cool part too is, even if you don't get a number out of it, if you're willing to sort of set things up a little bit, you can actually really show that in a very logical way. For example, let's say you're playing against a friend and you're like, God, I am so far ahead here, and let's say your friend goes, how far ahead do you think you are? And you're like, well, you're top decking, so let's just turn over your deck, right? Let's just see what you have in your deck, and what are the type of cards and the cards that could realistically get you out of this, and what do you need to what has to happen in order for you to win this game? Like, let's just say you let your friend stack their deck exactly how they wanted. Could they win that game? Right? Because maybe they're dead in a turn and it doesn't matter. There's no card in their deck that actually gets them out of it. Maybe they have something really powerful, a rare that you hadn't thought of. Right? And that's the card that you need to be considering. If they draw that card, that's the way that they get back in this game. Now, how can I manage my board and my resources to minimize the impact of that card? Right? And, these are the type of things that you can do if you're willing to kind of go a bit deeper. Again, you're not going to get that answer, but I'll tell you what, if the person needs to draw 3 specific cards in a row, they're less than 1% to win the game or whatever, right? They're in very, 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 very tiny chance to actually make that happen. So these are things that you can do to kind of look into it. I had one other thing I wanted to talk about, Luis, before we move to our traps. That's right. There's a lot of traps that you can fall into.
The 10 biggest traps?
No, not quite. I don't know how many I picked, but I picked some of the heavy hitters out of it. But one of the things I did want to talk about briefly was iteration, with the idea of using logic and sample size rather than brute force. That, the time traveling supercomputer I talked about before, that's brute forcing it, right? That's just jamming every single possible iteration of a scenario to come up with the best ones, and with complex systems, like cryptography for passwords on computers, you can do that. You can just say, all right, here's all the possible options until one of them actually clicks and it works. But with even more complex systems like magic, we just don't have the capability to do this. So what we do as players is we narrow down the variables to a reasonable level, and then we iterate. And usually this is accomplished through playing and testing games and matches and drafts and that kind of thing. But the super important part about the method, and what makes it and us humans different from the brute force tactic that like a computer would use, is that we can easily skip over massive chunks of potential data. This is where our tools and our experience comes in. As an example, let's say the next set that comes out has a vanilla 1/1 for 1 mana. We can use our experience and logic to tell us that this card probably won't be good. Our reasoning is that, that we've used these type of things before. The set doesn't look any different to make us think that would change. We know that 1/1s for 1 are generally underperform. And as a result, we don't use our time and energy looking for every possible outcome to see where this card works. Instead, we disregard it so we can focus on other cards, because we do have finite time and resources to generate to these things, unlike the time-traveling supercomputer. We don't need it to tell us this card has a low EV rate. We know it from experience, right? Humans are very good at spotting patterns and things. And if you play a reasonable number of drafts or games or whatever it is that you're trying to do, you can see a card over and over and over. And if it consistently performs well, your brain will link it to a good performance, and it's probably bump up its win percentage in your head, whatever that happens to be. And that's good. This is how we come to conclusions on things for super complex systems. Now, we're going to get into the traps. There's a lot of them.
Well, one
when
last
you try that. Yeah, go ahead.
Is when you talked about how your brain links performance and you start thinking, oh, this card is good or this card is bad. Mm-hmm. That ties into one of my other favorite subjects, which I'm not going to get into too much here, but I just want to say your subconscious is very good at recognizing patterns.
Yes.
And part of the strength of doing like 150 Kaladesh drafts like you did was a lot about a lot of cards that you don't really know exactly why. You don't know every single detail as to why, but you know which cards are good and evoke positive feelings because you know those cards. It's like you can tell that Welding Sparks is good.
And, that one was pretty obvious from day one, right? Yeah.
And you can tell that whatever the worst red common is bad. But the ones in the middle that are like harder to evaluate, that when we say like it depends how it fits in the format or it depends how it lines up in certain decks, you at this point, Marshall specifically, your subconscious knows the answer to all those things, and you will look at those cards and you'll have how you feel about what your intuition is about those cards is likely correct because of how many drafts you've done.
Yeah, and this is something that happened to me for my poker days as well. And the cool part about it is that this is not, sometimes people talk to you, Luis, about your Magic abilities and stuff. And I think that they don't give you enough credit for the amount of practice and time that you put in to get to where you are at Magic. Because that was kind of before, that was like, well, we didn't know you then, right? And, when you were playing just countless games against Paul Cheon, when you used to live with them, and, the games of Magic Online that you've played and all that kind of stuff to get to where you're at. And, I went through that process for poker where like I would sit there and look at the hands that I had played in a session, either online or in real life, that I had written down notes for, plug them in to a computer program called Poker Stove that would give you numbers related to what you were doing, give you your EV, because with poker, you actually can get that. With Magic, it's too complicated for a computer, but, and plus you need all these models and stuff, but for poker, you can. And I would start to see the patterns. I would start to put those things in the back somewhere in my head. And then, 5 years later, after having played for all that time, when these situations would pop up, I would just know. I would already just know. And it wasn't even like I could spout out every number back to you either. It wasn't just memorizing situations and numbers. I formed an intuition that told me exactly what was happening in a given scenario. And once I started to trust that, which I'm glad I waited, because if I would have trusted my gut intuition when I first started playing, it would have not led me in the right direction. But after having actually looked at these patterns over and over and over again, I started to develop a much better sense for when these things would happen. And I've done that with Magic too. And it takes a while, right? But if you're willing to do, they call it deliberate practice. This is, the idea of, focusing on certain aspects of the thing that you're trying to improve at and pushing hard in those directions, which for me was like looking at all these hand histories. That's what they're called, with poker. It's not fun. It kind of feels like crappy homework, right? You're sitting there like, okay, so I had this card and this card. My opponent had these. I'll plug them into this stupid program and I'll spit out these numbers. What does this all mean? It's a little bit mundane, but man, it adds up. And you do get an intuition for it. You really do. And it's a weird thing that happens. But like I said, it really taps into that idea that your brain is really good at seeing patterns, over the long term. Not that it's without its pitfalls. It is. Your brain can certainly trick you, but I mean, I've seen you do it too. People always ask you how you play so fast, and it's, part of the reasoning is because you're just very talented at Magic, but part of the reasoning also is because you've played 1 billion games, right? I mean, you've put in your time.
Yeah. And the years that I have done better are the years where I have practiced to the point where my intuition is actually on, because
yes.
What's dangerous, and I found this about myself, is because I am a very intuitive player, when I don't practice enough and my intuition is off, it leads me down the wrong path. It leads me astray. Like you said, there's some disadvantages. So, and that's also a play style thing, because some players kind of just derive everything, like they look and they figure everything out, and some, like, they play a little more by feel. And it's funny because playing by feel seems like the opposite of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it does, but it's not. It's not.
It's me just... I'm just offloading a lot of the decision-making power to my subconscious and just playing the game. And then when it's a hard decision, I stop and think. So.
Right, exactly. But all of this was based on a foundation of you striving to get the best EV that
practice,
you could.
Practice and iteration, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into some of the traps here, Luis. We've got quite a few of them, so I've kind of arranged them as far as like, this is what it is, and here's some examples and then some thoughts on each of them. So the first one, we're going to talk about is confirmation bias. And excuse me, this is a tendency to see things that support your views and ignore things that don't. And this is a big problem when it comes specifically to card evaluation. This is where this really pops up in Magic, I think. And it'll often be one of your biggest hurdles to overcome, because the truth is that you are not aware of it when you do it for the most part. And that's what makes things so, these things are so hard to spot, right? An example, you think a card is very good. You just do. You read it and you're like, this card's sweet. But it's early in the format and you've only played it one time. The next time you play it, it performs well, and you pat yourself on the back for your sick card evaluation skill. Great job. You play it again, but this time it kind of performs poorly, but you don't really recognize that because in your mind, it's a good card, right? It just didn't work out that time. It's still a great card. The next 3 times you play the card, it performs poorly, but you don't adjust your view on it because you don't take the poor data in the same way that you do the data that supports your initial beliefs. And this is a way to get stuck, right? Your evaluations aren't flexible. You're not adjusting to the conditions that have been seen, and you end up being closed-minded on cards. I mean, how many times have you, I'm sure you've seen this a lot, Luis, over your career.
Well, yeah, it's the best example I can remember, actually. I remember someone had a bot that was parsing all from replays on Magic Online the win percentages of every card. And the first way they did it is, what was the win percentage when this card was cast? And then you'd get stuff like, Magmatic
funny.
Chasm with a 95% win percentage, or Ulamog with a 98% win percentage.
Yeah,
it's like,
that's great.
It's like, great. When you cast a card that makes creatures unable to block, you win because you only cast the card the turn you win. When you cast a 10-drop, you win because 10 drops win you the game when you cast them.
Right.
And that's how people's minds work.
It's so funny.
They put this 8-drop in their deck, and when they cast it and win the game, they're like, wow, this card is great. It's really powerful. This is awesome. You don't keep track of the games you lose because it's just in your hand for 5 turns, and you die because you're a blocker short. And it's so much louder when this thing hits the board and just smashes your opponent. Right. And that is a very dangerous path to fall into. Yeah, you have to really fight it because it's just so hard.
Yeah. Another example are like these reactionary cards, these cards that are really amazing in very specific situations that tends to leave a really strong mark on you. You're like, wow, like the first time you play this card, you're like, dang, this card's fantastic. Like it won me the game, right? Like I would not have won the game without this card. It's amazing, right? But the problem here is that when they aren't very good, they don't stand out, because they sit in your hand doing nothing. It's the same thing like the Ulamogs that you were talking about, right? You can put that card in your deck and every time you cast it, it's great. But the times when you don't cast it, it's, we talk about opportunity cost, right? It's taking the spot of a spell you may have been able to cast or an additional land or whatever. And you very well could be losing the game because of that. But it's hard to pin it on that card because you say, well, it's not Ulamog's fault. He's just sitting in my hand. I didn't even cast him. Right? Like I tried to win the game with the cards I had and I didn't. So no problem. Then the next game you get to cast Ulamog and you're like, yeah, this card is fantastic. And you've improperly weighted the negative effect that having a card that costs 10 mana is because you thought, well, I never even got a chance to cast him. That's a major downside, right? Any card that you literally can't cast is really bad. And, taking it to an even more clear example is you look at your opening 7, right? It's 3 lands, 3 spells, and Ulamog, right? In many ways, you have mulliganed, right? I mean, for the foreseeable future in this game, Ulamog is going to sit in your hand effectively doing nothing. And that's a big cost. That's just a big cost to having that card in your hand. But again, you probably keep it. The rest of your hand looks good. You work your way through, but you never really get to single out and say, this card was terrible. I couldn't even cast it. Like the worst card in your entire deck is better than a card that you can't cast, right? Like at least it does something, right? They don't make Magic cards that do nothing very often, right? But the 10-drop does nothing if you never cast it. And this is where, that confirmation bias can really get you because you can think of it in terms of it's a great card. Every time I play it, I win the game. What more do you want out of a Magic card than that? Right. And, for us, well, we're here to tell you what more you want. How about one that you can actually cast? But that's a crazy gap, right? That's a huge, I would say that in most draft formats, putting a 10 mana spell into your deck actively decreases your win percent. You're looking to try to increase it as much as you possibly can, and it actually brings your deck down. And there are going to be people that will tell you that that card is great. That delta is huge, right? What it actually does versus what you think it does, that's the real danger. Because if you come up with a card, let's say, Luis, some good 5-drop, and I'm like, oh, that thing's a B plus, and you're like, I think it's a B minus. Whatever, right? We're close enough. We both know it's a good card. We're going to put it in our deck every time we can.
When you're talking about Bastion Mastodon versus Wayward Giant, it's like, sure, Wayward Giant's a little bit better, but it's not.
Yeah.
If you told me I had to switch one out for the other, I'd be like, okay, sure.
Sure, right? And to you and I, we can have fun debating the merits of one over the other all we want, but we know at the end of the argument that they're pretty close. Here, what we think and what somebody else might think, or, what you think about a card versus how it actually performs is vastly different. And that's the real trap with confirmation bias, is that it keeps you stuck. It keeps you in that mentality of not able to reevaluate and to truly appreciate the full view on how a card performs, because you've already decided. You decided early on, nope, this card's great. And then the only things that you use as data points are things that support the fact that the card's great. And so, that's a big one. Everybody falls into it on some level. Everybody has favorite cards, right?
Well, also, when you start a format, you have preconceptions about what's going to be good. I mean, actually, it's kind of funny. Nimble Innovator actually fell into this. We talked about this during the crack.
Totally.
I saw it in my first draft. I'm like, oh, this looks good. This looks like a card that'd be good. I got beaten badly enough when I played it the first couple of times that I was quickly disabused of that notion. But that is the kind of card that I could see myself overestimating.
Mm-hmm. And let's say you played against a deck with a bunch of 3/2s in it. You might have been like, oh, this card's great. Yeah. And then it might have taken like a lesser player than you a lot longer to let go of that initial read.
Well, that actually leads us into our next point, which is the lack of an appropriate sample size.
Oh, yeah.
So when you say sample size, we just say, like, how many times did you play this, card, or how many games did you play with this deck to try to figure out what you're trying to figure out? And let me tell you right now, Magic is a game of too small sample sizes.
Yes.
You never get high enough sample sizes, or very rarely do, in any reasonable form, that you should just use
percentages or numbers.
Straight up percentages or numbers that you got as proof. What the trick is, and this is what's fun and difficult about it, is that you need to use your knowledge of how things played out, plus the games you played, as examples to try and figure out the best answer you possibly can. A great example, and this comes up more in Constructed than it does in Limited, is if I play 10 games of blue-white against black-green, the two most popular decks in Standard, and in those 10 games, blue-white goes 7-3 against black-green, I can't be like, well, it's a 70% matchup. That sample size is ludicrously small.
Right.
If I played 100 games and I won like 68, I would think, okay, blue-white's favored. 100 games is actually enough that I think is a reasonable
I think you're
sample
starting to. Yeah, you're definitely starting to approach something that you would want.
And in Limited, you're playing 3 matches at most with your average deck. So when you go 3-0 with a deck, or you go 1-2 with a deck, or you go 3 with a deck, you can't just use that as how good was this deck. Yeah. If you 3-0, it doesn't mean the deck was great, and if you 1-2, it doesn't mean the deck was awful. Granted, it's evidence, it's worth something, but you also need to. You're the person there during the games. You look at the games and think like, well, I 3-0'd, but 2 of my opponents missed land drops and one of them rolled a 5, or I 3-0'd, but I played against 2 really slow decks with my kind of bad aggro deck, but it ended up being well positioned there. And then maybe you 3-0 with a couple more bad aggro decks, and then you start thinking, okay, bad aggro decks are actually just good.
Yeah.
and that starts becoming relevant. Or you draft 2 similar decks, and then all of a sudden you start losing more, and you're like, okay, I just got lucky in that first one. And it's just difficult because you're not going to get the sample size you need, but you still should try to get as much information out of the matches you play. It's very tempting to use 3 to 5 matches as evidence of something when it's just really not. Just look at how the game's played out and look at how, like, wow, Nimble Innovator matched up very poorly against these creatures. And you can also even look at the creatures in the set and kind of get there too. And then you end up with the kind of information you need out of the cards.
I think the takeaway from this trap, the lack of appropriate sample size, isn't get the appropriate sample size, because you're not going to.
You're not going to.
It's awareness. It's knowing that what we're really trying to do and the challenge that we face here is extrapolating results in a reasonable way. And that doesn't mean playing a card once, having it be good and say this card's good. And it doesn't mean playing a deck or an archetype and winning a draft and saying this archetype's great. You know, you might have had 3 really great rares for that archetype. And the next time you play the archetype, you only have 1, right? And that could be the difference. So, you know, you take these data points and you don't expect to get the truest sample size ever, but you remain aware. You remain aware that what you're dealing with is just one data point. And some data points are stronger than others, and you'll figure that out as you work your way through. Oh, buddy, this next one. This is a big one. This one's called the gambler's fallacy, right? And, you know, this is the idea that if something happens more often than you would expect the average to be for like a specific time frame, that it's more likely that the opposite will happen in the future. This is the idea that things even out or balance naturally for some reason, like these random events will balance out. The opposite or the cousin of gambler's fallacy is called the hot hand fallacy, which is similar to thinking that as things are going well for you, for example, that they will continue to go well from you, even though these are random events. This term comes from basketball, actually, you know, which is that, you know, if people will think that if somebody is shooting well, that they will continue to shoot well. And they've run a lot of statistical numbers that show that that's not actually the case, or statistical studies that show that that's not the case at all. An example of the gambler's fallacy for Magic is I've mulliganed the last 4 games in a row. There's no way I'll have to mulligan again next time. That is not how it works. And if you say that out loud, you're guaranteed to mulligan the next hand.
You know, it's like saying like, oh, I'm not going to keep this 2-lander on the draw because the last 2 times I kept that, I didn't get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, what happens here mathematically or, you know, big conceptually speaking is this line of thinking is false. You have to get into huge sample sizes. Like, for example, if you're talking about a coin flip scenario, a 50-50, before, you know, you really see that 50-50 come to fruition. But on any given small stretch of it, it can be wildly divergent. And people way overestimate that randomness sort of comes back to that middle ground on its own. It really doesn't. These things are expressed over large sample sizes, not small ones. And we're almost always dealing with small ones as humans. You know, if you go to a casino, or if you're playing Magic with your friends or online for a day or whatever, you know, you're talking about 10 or 15 rolls or spins or whatever, or maybe even 100 if you spin all day or whatever it is. This is not even close. You can easily see if you flip 100 coins in a row, 65 or 80 or, like these numbers get way out of whack. And the next one is not determined by what happened prior. It's simply another event that has an exactly 50% chance of being one or the other. And the next one after that has the exact same chance. And it does not matter what happened before. That's a human construct, right? The coin doesn't care what was flipped before. The little ball on the roulette wheel doesn't know that it came up on red or black or green or whatever, multiple times in a row. It doesn't care. The universe doesn't have a balancing law that brings these things back in. It's simply another coin flip, and it's simply 50-50 again. And, one of the interesting things, Luis, is they've done these studies about how people would map out something that was random, like a bunch of coin flips, and they always do it way too close to 50-50. Like they'll be like, okay, this one will go up if, there's a few more tails on this side, but then the heads catches back up. And they see this over and over again when people try to simulate what a random, array would look like. And an actual random array doesn't look anything like that. There's big streaks of heads, tails, heads, tails, heads. That happens all the time in nature and in random events, and way more than humans give it credit for. So the takeaway, this is really important, is that you should expect this rather than dread it or fight it, right? you're not the only person that these bad things happen to where you have to mulligan 4 or 5 times in a row, right? It feels like it when you're going through it, but it literally happens to all of us. It happens to Luis. It happens to me, the person sitting across from you, calmly mulliganing rather than cursing their luck or asking why me. That person has to mulligan 4 times, 5 times in a row, every time in a tournament, that kind of stuff. If you want to be really great at Magic, and in fact, in many scenarios in life that you don't have a lot of control over, you have to be willing to put this aside, this idea of, things are going to turn around because that's how the universe works. It's not. It's very normal for these things to happen to you. And even though it feels like crap, you need to be better than the other people that you're playing against, or else you're going to fall behind too. That's a big one, Luis.
Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of people who are listening to this are going to be like, yeah, this is obvious. I'll tell you what, it's not obvious. This is something people run into all the time. And if it's something you've already internalized, that's great. You're ahead of the game, but don't be dismissive of how many people I think are well served by hearing this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that think that they know about it. And then when they mulligan 5 times in a row, in the back of their head, they're thinking, there's no way I'll have to mulligan again. It's like, nope, that's not how it works. If you're, 25% to have to mulligan a hand, you're just taking your 1 and 4 into the next one. That's just how it works. Another one, that happens quite a bit. And this is one that you actually touched on. I think with your Mutavault example touches on this, which is the sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. The sunk cost fallacy. And this is where you use the reasoning that you've already invested resources into something to make a decision to not waste those resources, even if the right decision is to just abandon them.
Yes.
A good real life example is you owe $200,000 on a house you purchased, but the real estate market crashes. Now that house is worth like $170,000. You shouldn't pay $200,000 for a $170,000 house, but you already paid $100,000 in because you bought it when it was worth $300,000. A lot of people are going to sit there and pay that $200,000.
Yep.
Even though the house is worth less than that.
Yep.
And it's like, well, I already paid $100,000. It's like, that doesn't matter. It sucks. The $100,000 is gone.
Yeah, and that's the sunk cost part of the equation here, right? That's the thing that's gone.
$100,000 is a sunk cost. It has vanished. And now, from this point, from where you are right now, would you pay $200,000 for this thing that's worth $170,000? And if the answer is no, that $100,000 that you paid before it has no bearing at all.
Right. It just feels bad.
It does feel bad. And sunk costs aren't great. You want to avoid them, but you can't. That's going to happen at some point. And it's like, I've already spent $7,000 repairing my car. And now this next repair is worth more than the car itself. Therefore the car is totaled. The fact that you spent a bunch of money before just doesn't matter.
No, but you'll see people be like, well, I'm 7K in, we're going the other 15 now. And I'm just going to have, like you said, I'm going to pay 15, total of $22,000 for a car that's worth 20 or, 18 or 17, that kind of thing. And you just see that. And does your Mutavault example fit that? And this is like not,
it does.
We were talking about the feel bads, but also just like within the game.
Within the game, the person, I think, saw that they had invested mana into the Mutavault and decided to attack it because they'd already invested the mana. Yeah. And they didn't want to waste the mana. I think that's part of it.
I think that is. I genuinely believe that that's part of it, where a computer, that was a perfect Magic player would sit down, and if you sat them down in that scenario, and, in fact, I'm going to use this as my example because I think this is a good example is, let's say that you, as the listener, could tag in Owen Turtenwald, Huey Jensen, Luis Scott-Vargas into your match at any moment. Okay.
I actually can. I can.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take you up on that then. Okay. They have, when you tag them in, they get all the information that you had leading up. So there's no gap there where they're like, well, they didn't know how the person played. No, you know everything. You get to transfer all of that. Right. How are they going to play these situations? Right. If they come in and, let's say in this example, let's say you have a creature and you've put an aura on it, thinking it's your best route to victory when you do so. It's become evident that in this case, that's not going to happen. That is not the way that you're going to win this game, right? And so instead of cutting your losses and pursuing an alternative route to winning, you think, well, I'm in this deep. I already put all this resources into this stupid creature, and I'm going for it. Right. So that would be a typical person who's suffering from this sunk cost fallacy. They're just like, well, I've already made that decision. And even though it doesn't seem like it might not work out, hey, I've put this aura on this creature. I can't give up on it now. In we go. So let's say that you could, at that point, right before you start attacking or whatever, you just tag in Owen. So Owen sits down. He has all that information that you did too. He's going to sit down and he's going to evaluate the situation as it sits, determine the best chance of victory does not lie with this creature with the aura on it. And he's going to change course because he has no emotional attachment. He's just going to look at it as a snapshot of the board and say, well, that's not going to work. He doesn't care that, the aura, how the aura got on it. There could be any number of reasons, but from his perspective, he's looking at a fresh board state. He can see very clearly that this creature with this aura is not going to get the job done. So he's going to take a different route. He's not emotionally attached to it. And, there's reasons for that. He's a professional gamer, so he's just less likely to fall into the trap of sunk cost fallacy because he's probably thought about this or been taught it. And also, they aren't the ones who made the investment. They didn't put this creature on this aura on this creature and have this whole game plan in their head about winning with this certain 2-card combo or whatever it was. So he's just going to dryly take a look at the board state, snapshot it, say this is the way that we're going to win and continue on. And you know what? He's going to have a better chance to win the game than you are. Because even though you've correctly recognized that this path is not going to lead to a place that you want to go, it's really hard to get off that route sometimes. And this is one of the things that you need to be aware of. If you make a mistake or if you put your resources or whatever, this could be in the draft, right? If we're doing black. I opened a black bomb. I got past a decent black card. Okay, black dried up a little bit, right? You can cut your losses. It's okay to say, this isn't going to work and I'm not going to go down this path anymore. And once you do that, you can leave the sunk cost stuff behind you. And that's a hard thing to do, but, cause I don't know what motivates it in your brain. I guess it's just the general idea that when you put resources into something, you should get whatever you were hoping for out of them. Even if that's become clear, that's not going to happen. Your brain has a hard time adjusting.
Another reason that the sunk cost fallacy is actually good with the mutavault example is sunk cost fallacy really tends to crop up when you made a mistake and then you compound that mistake by continuing to make the mistake.
Yes, exactly. Because this is a way to have a catastrophically bad effect on your game, right?
Yep.
One more I found. I didn't actually know the name for this before, but it's one that I've talked to you about before, Luis. I've also talked to Ben Stark about this quite a bit, and now I have a name for it. It's called distinction bias. And this is the tendency to view things as more dissimilar when evaluated together than you would if you evaluated them independently. And I know that's a weird sentence, so I'm going to give you an example. You and your friend are arguing about what the best card out of some pack is to take pack one, pick one. Okay. Your friend says it's card A and it's not card B. And you know what else? It's not remotely close. How many times have you heard that one, right? And he continues to tell you how much better card A is than card B. Okay. But if you look at the two cards, instead of comparing them directly to each other, you just simply rate them independently on a scale of like 1 to 100 or whatever, where 100 is like, an A+ bomb and a 1 is an unplayable. Your friend may rate one of those an 82 and the other one an 84, right? They're actually pretty close when it comes down to it. It's just that you get into this mindset of two things competing against each other. And then that, for whatever reason, that gap widens. And you'll see this all the time when it comes to, one play to make, or one choice like out of a draft or whatever. And I mean, you're a professional Magic player, Luis. You live in this world. I mean, I've seen pros go at it hard over stuff that's like, I don't think the gap's that big there, right? Like, I know it's fun to say not remotely close, but it's kind of close. And I've seen that 100 times, out of Magic players, since I've came back to the game.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon that it sometimes discussing plays feels very binary.
Yes.
What you're saying is there's the right play and then there's the wrong play. And sometimes that's useful when you're trying to determine, ultimately you are trying to determine the best play. But when it is useful to talk about, why would you take this card over this card? Or why would you make this play over this play? Mm-hmm. And if they're close, talk about why they're close. Don't say, it's not just this is correct, everything else is wrong, even though sometimes that is the case. It's just it ends up being less useful to speak in such absolutes.
Yes. And look, this one I don't think carries as much weight as some of the other traps that we've talked about. This is just one that I think Magic players are particularly susceptible to. And I think they are losing out a little bit. I feel like, if you and I, let's say you and I, we're having a discussion similar to one that I used in the example where I'm like, no, you should definitely take this card. And you're like, dude, no way. It's not close. You should take this card. And I'm like, what? I'm like, this card's way better than that card. What are you talking about? And we'll go back and forth on it. Right. But if you and I talked how we actually talked to each other, where I said, I think it's close, but I do think we should take this card for this reason. And you said, I see what you're saying, but I think we should probably take this one because of this, right? Now in my head, I know that these cards are both very good and that they're quite close together. And now we're starting to discuss the differences between them and why one might be better than the other. And even if we disagree, if we avoid that phenomenon, that distinction bias of just saying like, no, they're very far apart, the next time I see these cards, whether they're together or not, I'll have a better idea. Because let's say I'm a less experienced player and you come up to me as the more experienced player and you say, and I say, I think I'm going to take this. I would take this card, pack one, pick one. And you go, dude, it's not close. It's this other card. And I go, oh, okay. And I kind of slink off like, well, I guess I was wrong about that. But one of the things I may take away from that discussion is that the card I thought was good isn't good, right? Because you've led me to believe that it's not remotely close, that this other card is so much better. And I'm like, wow, I actually thought this card was good. And I guess I was wrong because, Luis told me that I shouldn't even consider it. I should just take this other one. Where if we had ignored that distinction bias and had a more nuanced conversation, I may come away with going, okay, this card is pretty good. I wasn't completely off here. But this other one's better for this reason. And now I've learned something that I can take forward from both of the cards. So it's just a way to open up more information.
I will say that as someone who's now worked with a lot of Magic players, both in Magic and non-Magic contexts, beating the hyperbole out of them is something that you have to do.
You really do. You really do, man. It is so hard to get to actual thought, Yeah, busted, broken, that kind of stuff. All right, that was the last of the traps that I had, Luis. But I did want to kind of wrap things up. I had a story. I actually have a story to tell. Yeah, because one of the things that we've tried to weave into this episode of the podcast, because Luis and I feel so strongly about this as one of the ways that you approach life, not just gaming, but also life, is one that I had, which was when I bought a condo. And if you've ever bought a piece of property like a condo or a house, it's stressful. It's very stressful. You have to do a bunch of applications, a ton of paperwork that you've probably never done before. They ask for the weirdest stuff. We need photocopies of this. We need these things signed 10 times. We need these paperworks over here. And then what ends up happening is, so what was happening for me is I was applying for a loan, right? I was hoping to be able to get a loan so that I could buy a condo. And by this point, I had been playing poker for a while, and I had really started to embrace a lot of this EV mentality and a lot of this, thinking in terms of logical stuff. Before that, I didn't as much. I wasn't really much of a gamer. I played some video games, but that was about it. And I didn't really think about it. I was just like, whatever. I just do what other people do because that's what you do, right? And, since then I've realized that no, you need to question things for yourself. But with this, I had been playing poker long enough that when it came time for me to submit my loan, I was very stressed, right? I didn't know if I was going to get it, and I didn't know what interest rate I would get, and that might be a deal breaker. And on top of it, when you're putting in a loan for a condo, it's a time, like you don't have all the time in the world. If you don't buy it, somebody else will. And so it introduces a lot of layers of stress. But what happened to me is I got everything I needed to get done, and I submitted my loan application. And after I put it in, I came home and I was talking to a family member, and they were like, oh, you must be so nervous. Like, because what if they don't give it to you? Or, what if you don't get it? And I looked and I'm like, I'm not nervous. And I was like, why am I not? Like, I should be stressing out about this. It's going to be a week and a half until I hear from this thing. But normally I would be like, God, I hope I get this, right? I'd wake up in the morning like, oh, please, if I get this loan, I can move and I'll have a new place. And it's like, it's a life-changing event, right? And there was a lot of weight on this event for me personally, right? And I wasn't nervous at all. at all nervous. And I'm like, why am I not? I should be. And I realized that what I had done mentality wise through this process was I had given them everything they asked for. I had taken a class. I had done a thing. I had promptly responded to all inquiries. I had delivered papers. I had done everything that was in my power to do to affect the outcome of this. And now, having handed it off, I was done. And I was like, oh, this is just like when I play poker, where I had learned that everything that I needed to do at the poker table was decide what actions to take to give me the best outcome that I possibly could have. Once I had taken those actions, as sometimes happens in poker, they say you're all in. And then what happens is the dealer deals out the rest of the cards and you have absolutely no control over what those cards are. And all you can do is look back and say, did I make the right decision? Did I put myself in the best position? And sometimes you win it and sometimes you lose it. And a lot of times, you don't have a lot of control over it. And with this loan thing, I was like, I did. I felt very comfortable that I had done everything I needed to do to put myself in the best position to get the loan. And that was what I cared about now. That was what was important to me. What wasn't as important to me was exactly how the thing came out, because I knew that I couldn't do more anyway. And that is such a liberating feeling to know that I played this correctly, right? I did the things that I needed to do, and the outcome's going to be the outcome. And to get super hung up on the outcome and to get nervous and whatever on it isn't doing you any good, right? I knew that if I didn't get the loan, that I would just simply continue in my life to give myself the best possible, option for a good outcome. And that eventually it comes out in the wash, because when you do it, you do this stuff over and over and over. And if you sit down at a magic table and do these little decisions and these little calculations and these little things correctly over and over and over and over again, you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm Louis Scott-Vargas. I've got 8 Pro Tour top 8s. I'm in the Hall of Fame, right? These are what these great players really do, right? They have a base level of aptitude, but what they're really doing is little micro versions of what I was talking about with my loan. And that's what I do at poker too. I just do these little micro versions of this over and over and over. And when you track these things, you see it come out in the wash. And I think that for you listening, as the listener, I think that this is the overall mentality that you should be striving for in your life, is to get to the point where you put all your focus and energy into putting yourself in a good position and accept the outcomes as they come, but know that you're going to come back and repeat that. And by the time a year goes by and 2 years goes by and 10 and 15, you get further and further and further ahead, and the gap widens and widens. And along the way, you'll have some setbacks. It's not just smooth sailing, but it's just continually putting yourself in a position to succeed and focusing on that aspect of it. And that to me is the big lesson that you can take from this episode, that looking for EV, I knew that I made the best EV decision that I could with the condo and the things that I had done with it. And at that point, I was happy with myself. I knew I did what I needed to do, and I knew I would continue to do it. And for me, I haven't really looked back. That was a big turning point for me, because that was the first time I applied poker stuff to real life. And I didn't even do it on purpose. It just happened. And, since then I kind of have looked for that kind of thing. And I got
There's faster ways to brag about owning a condo, I suppose.
Well, what if I didn't get the loan?
I guess you never really finished the story. It doesn't matter, though.
I did get the
results don't matter.
No, the results didn't matter. I would have gotten somewhere anyway, but as it turned out, I didn't end up in that time. I still have it too, though I don't live there anymore. Anyway, those are my parting thoughts for this stuff. I think it's really important. And I think that while this podcast we focus on the magic aspects of this, I really do believe that it carries over into real life pretty often. I've seen you do it too, Luis.
Yeah,
I have. I've seen you, make your decisions in life using this same type of mentality.
Oh, I do all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Should we wrap up?
Yeah, let's do that.
If you want to find us on social media, you can say hi. We're there. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find links to everything that's related to us and the podcast at lrcast.com. That includes like Luis's stream. highly recommended viewing over on Twitch. I've got a stream too. I don't stream as often as Luis, but I do sometimes, and we have fun. And like I said, I put it right on the front page of all the links to all the things that we do, the YouTube channel and all that kind of stuff too. I also want to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com, the best place on the internet to get Magic related stuff. It's just the best. You go there, you're going to be able to find the cards you want. You're going to be able to find the supplies. Heck, they even have LR stuff. It's part of our deal. They're like, yeah, we're going to do LR stuff. So I've got sleeves there, deck boxes, and you can find that stuff, t-shirts on there for LR. And it's really cool. Like you can show up to your local store with your LR deck box and be like, this is what I'm about. Right. This is how I approach the game. This is the methods that I like to do, and kind of, show them what you think. And it's really easy to do. It's all there on Channel Fireball. And like I said, one of the coolest things is that you get all that free content. I mean, geez, you get to go there and watch Owen Turtenwald play whatever deck is in standard or give you a sideboarding guide. Like, where else can you get that? Like, he's the best player in the world, and he's going to tell you exactly how he sideboards for a certain matchup. You're just not going to get that anywhere else, and you can find that at channelfireball.com. Okay, that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully this show was informative for you, and I know we had a good time doing it. We'll see you next week.
This seems like the perfect time to talk about a horrendously minus EV game that we played a few times.
Great.
So in previous signups, I at length talked about the credit card game, which I think is a great way to determine who pays for dinner. That's right.
And by the way, the credit card game is neutral EV in most scenarios.
Yes. You shuffle up cards and you randomly determine who pays for dinner. And I think that's great for a lot of reasons that I went into before. There's a variant of that we have played a few times that actually is, like I said, horrendously minus EV, both for certain people in the game and for the overall friendship level of the group. But it's really funny. And that's diplomacy.
Oh, God.
So
wow. This is either for friends you don't really like or friends that you know would never leave you, basically.
So how diplomacy works is everyone gets a vote, and the person who gets voted for the most pays for dinner. So,
dude, that is so...
It's a pretty aggressive game, and
to say the least.
And so there's a couple things that are interesting that are going on. One is that, let's say you have a group of 9 people or so, because I think that's the first time we played, we had about that many people. There are a couple of people in the group who this game is horrendously minus EV for. They should know they shouldn't play this game. And there's a couple people in the group who it's very highly positive EV for because they know they're not going to get voted for. So first of all, for the game,
how do you know if you're one or the other?
Well, I'll get to that. But for the game even to even happen, people have to either misevaluate the odds that they lose or be willing to accept a minus EV game just because they think it's funny.
Yes.
Which is more the second.
That is a hurdle, yes.
So we played this actually with our team, with Team Channel Fireball, and the loser in this particular case was Kibler, Brian Kibler, Hall of Famer, who he got the most votes and he paid for dinner. And so what was interesting about that is, first of all, he knew that he was going to in the top 2 or 3 people to get votes.
Out of how many roughly were there?
I think there's 9 or 10.
Okay.
I think he had to have known that he was horrendously minus EV in this game. And the reason is, after thinking about it more and looking at it, the people who tend to not fare well in the diplomacy game are people who fall into a couple of categories, and especially when you fall into all the categories. One is people who are very lucky, and Kibler's very lucky. The other is people who will take the loss well. Kibler did take the loss well. I mean, he knew he was a huge underdog, and he decided to play anyway. The other is people who have a lot of resources, which Kibler also did have. And you combine all those, and then that's why he was a slam dunk to pay. Oh, the other one was people who have run really well in the credit card game, which is normally how we determine who pays.
Yeah.
You can also run well in that. So, for example, Ben Stark, someone we've mentioned many times on the podcast, he will never play diplomacy because he knows he will always pay if he does, because he fits all the boxes that I checked there.
He does tick too many of those boxes, doesn't he?
So the most interesting part of diplomacy that I had is when we played it again with roughly the same group. And the person who ended up losing, won Shahar Shenhar, back-to-back world champion, he lost because he voted for the wrong person, because he correctly identified that he was one of the 2 people who who was
Wait,
going
he
to...
misplayed?
He
Is that what you're saying?
diplomacy. Yes, it's very difficult to do that. But he correctly identified that he was going to be one of the people who was most likely to pay. Again, he decided to play regardless. He voted for Kibler, who had lost the first time. And it turned out that had he voted for a different person, for Conley would have had to pay. And the misplay that Shahar made was he voted for Kibler, but Kibler lost the last time. And the whole group was very unlikely to vote the same person to pay 2 times in a row.
Yeah, that doesn't have a good feel to it, does it?
No, it just feels really aggressive. And Shahar just didn't have a good read on the table. So
oh man.
he actually misplayed and lost his result, which I think is pretty funny. So if you could take anything away from this, it's do not play diplomacy. It is not a good idea. You should not do it. If you want to ignore that and still play it, it is pretty fun.
Oh man, no way.
Just try not to be too lucky, too rich, or run too well on the credit card game, or you are in trouble.